Welcome to the Observer Research Foundation for this very timely and interesting talk on the future trends on terrorism, counterterrorism, and sort of how are we going to look into this proverbial problem in the times to come. Of course, a lot has changed and is changing in this regard, from Afghanistan to Syria, and more, of course, locally in an Indian context, in Kashmir, and other parts of the country. I will not take too much time introducing the panel, but of course, you know who is speaking today and who is not speaking today. How we will start is we will give about ballpark 10 minutes to each speaker to sort of offer their comments on broadly the topic that we are discussing today. And once we have gone through our list of speakers, and I will quickly sort of run through their names for those who have not been able to read through it. After that, we'll try to have a much more freewheeling discussions between the speakers and the audience, and I will be trying my best to moderate it so that we don't have many monologues, but have a more of a discussion with the participants. So very quickly, of course, we've got Brigadier Sushil Tanwar. So welcome, sir. We look forward to your comments first and foremost. We have got Dr. Tricia Bacon, who's been working in this field for a long period of time and also spent some time here at ORF some time ago. Dr. Bacon, welcome, and thanks for joining us from a very different time zone. We've got Dr. Sanchita Bhattacharya, who will also give her views on these issues. And finally, we will end with Priyadarshini Barua as the last speaker before we open it up for a more freewheeling conversation. Can I invite Brigadier Tanwar to begin with his opening remarks? Thank you.
Thank you. And a very good evening to ladies and gentlemen. Of course, delighted to be here and looking forward to the comments from my fellow co-panelists and the insights from the audience. The world has seen a few conventional military conflicts in recent years, but it is very evident that terrorism continues to pose the most significant challenge to global peace and security. So in next 8 to 10 minutes, I intend to highlight certain key aspects of global terrorism and frame them in our own regional context. First is the transnational character of terrorism. We have seen and witnessed the decentralization of terrorist outfits, and we have regional affiliates of organizations like Al-Qaeda and Islamic State undertaking local actions after drawing guidance, support, or inspiration from a centralized entity. Terrorist organizations can be transnational in multiple ways in their goals and objectives, in their operational reach, in their recruitment areas, and in their organizational structure. And nowhere is this more evident than in the terrorist groups which are operating in J&K. Lashkar, Jaish, Hizbul Mujahideen, Al-Badr, and all the other terrorist organizations have their leadership based in Pakistan. And they draw their strategic guidance and tactical instructions from across the border or the line of control. And some of these organizations like Lashkar and Jaish are trying to extend their influence in the Indian subcontinent and beyond it. Let me give you another example. The RPG attack on the Punjab Police Headquarters in November 22. The planning was done by Harvinder Singh of Babbar Khalsa International, who is based in Pakistan. The operational coordination was done by Lakhvinder Singh, who is based in Canada. The attack was executed by Bablu and Deepak, who are in India, and erstwhile members of the Lawrence Bishnoi gang. And that brings me to the second issue, the close relationship between terrorist outfits and organized crime networks. There are enough evidences of terrorist groups in Southeast Asia, Africa, and other parts of the world using criminal syndicates for weapon smuggling, human trafficking, and funding. And if we look at in our neighborhood, and I keep going back to Pakistan simply because that directly affects us, the terrorist handlers in Pakistan are using the trans-border smuggling syndicates to supply weapons, uh, fake currency, and other logistic support to their cadres operating in J&K. The third issue is the impact of technology. So while the use of technology is not a very recent phenomena, the sheer scope and sophistication that the modern technological tools offer today provide immense opportunities for terrorist organizations to exploit. The use of encrypted tools, VPNs, virtual numbers, encrypted applications for detecting, for evading the detection, use of social media and generative AI, augmented reality for training, the use of bitcoins, cryptocurrencies for funding. So all of these have fundamentally transformed the manner in which terrorist organizations recruit, expand, and operate. And we are seeing enough indications of all these technological tools being exploited both in J&K and in Northeast in our context. The another key issue is the mainstreaming of violent narratives. And before that, I will just focus on one more technological development that is a serious threat, and that is the development in the drones technology. So we have seen how terrorist outfits have used drones in Middle East against targets on sea, and even in the failed attack on Indian Air Force base in Jammu. And the terrorist handlers based in Pakistan are constantly trying to see how they can use drones to supply warlike stores and other logistics issues with their cadres who are operating in J&K. And when I spoke of the linkages of terrorist organizations with the organized crime networks, there's one more aspect to it, and that is the narco-terrorism, wherein we are seeing that a lot of terrorist handlers, they are using the existing networks to supply, along with drugs, the warlike stores. And this is happening both in J&K and in Northeast. Coming back to the mainstreaming of the violent extremist narratives that have given rise to and encouraged the lone wolf attacks, individual actors who may not have any physical contact with the organizations from where they are drawing inspiration from. Socio-religious insecurities and ideological fervor, they provide very attractive recruitment grounds for terrorist organizations across the globe. And therefore, in J&K and in other parts of India as well, subversion and radicalization through targeted propaganda campaigns, especially on the social media, are of immediate high concern. And let me conclude by emphasizing that the use of terrorism as an instrument of state policy is the biggest challenge in combating global terrorism. Therefore, a closer scrutiny of state-sponsored actions, closer monitoring of the funding channels, and a further strengthening of the legal frameworks along with the collaborative international approach are an absolute imperative. So I will finish now, and we look forward to the question answers that the audience may have later. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Those are some great insights, specifically from your vantage point, and we are a lot to sort of unpack, and especially like that you brought up the legal frameworks part. That seems to be a very big gray area when we are dealing with prosecution of terror cases. But I'll come back to that. That's a very interesting area to probe in the coming few minutes. May I invite Dr. Bhattacharya now for her comments?
Good evening, everyone. I'm very thankful to ORF for inviting me, and I hope this session will be quite engaging. Like Sir was mentioning about most of the terror organizations which operate in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, I would be concentrating my brief on three terror organizations: Indian Mujahideen, PFI, and Hizb ut-Tahrir, which actually operate in the mainland India. And as we all know, like in the broader context of international terrorism, we are experiencing a downfall of major terror attacks in terms of explosions or blasts. But the threat towards terrorism is actually coming from radical extremism, and which is very much present with frequent lone wolf terror attacks and radicalization of the youth. According to the Europol report, the latest report of Europol, which was published in January this year, there have been 14 such jihadi lone wolf attack in Europe, which is a sharp increase from 6 attacks which have taken places the previous year. And along with these lone wolf terror attacks, there has been a tendency of radicalizing impressionable youth towards the recent cause of Gaza. And also, it has happened previously, as we have seen with 9/11 and the US attack on Iraq and Afghanistan as well. So, after beginning with this pointer, I want to extend it and I want to bring it to the Indian context. Like what is happening in India. Right now, we are not experiencing any major terror attacks as we saw like 10 to 15 years back, especially between 2001 to 2013, when the country faced innumerable terror attacks in most parts, ranging from, I would say, Ajmer to Guwahati to Bangalore, Delhi, obviously Mumbai, Chennai, and Bangalore. The last recorded attack so far last year was in a small, movie theater in Tirunelveli, and obviously there was no casualty. So we are in a way out of that direct, scenario of terror attacks which were happening in India. But at the same time, we can say that India is also going through a stage in which these three terror organizations, especially Indian Mujahideen, PFI, and Hizb ut-Tahrir, need a proper monitoring, and we need to have a sort of long-term approach towards dealing with three of these terror organizations. Like we all know, Indian Mujahideen is more or less a defunct organization now, with extensive and anti-terror operations and massive arrests which have been taken place since 10 to 15 years. But at the same time, we must not forget that all these terror operatives are under trial. And as a result of that, whenever a case comes up in an NIA court or in an ATS court, this becomes a pretext for these organizations to recruit young, impressionable youth into their terror domain by saying that the government, especially Indian government, is oppressing a certain section of the society. So these terror cases, the ongoing terror cases, become a reason of terror recruitment, or you can say recruitment of sympathizers who are in line with the terror cause. Secondly, with respect to PFI, we can say that PFI actually offers a very interesting what to say case study, because overtly if we see the 18-point agenda or its constitution, it talks about social harmony, it talks about upliftment of the suppressed, it also talks about social reforms. But actually in actually what to say its real motive or its real method is to call for a civil war by creating unrest and strife within the Indian society using methods of cruelty, subjugation, and undermining the unity and sovereignty of the nation. So, PFI comes as a very interesting terror organization which has been banned by the Indian government, I think, in 2022, if I'm not wrong, along with its other aliases like the National Women's Front, Rehab India Foundation, and All India Imams Council. Now, another very disturbing factor or another very disturbing point related to PFI is its cadre strength from other countries. It has a very strong around 13,000 international cadres, which it drew from countries of UAE, Oman, Qatar, Kuwait, and Singapore. And these international cadres have formed sort of executive committees in all these countries, and their major their major aim is to collect as much fund as they can and channelize those funds through hawala and other illegal transaction process towards India for furthering the cause of PFI as an organization. And as sir also was also mentioning about the use of social media, PFI is extremely it is apt in using social media for its own cause. It has had a sort of 100,000 members it used to have in its YouTube channel, and it is also very much active. It used to be very much active in Twitter as well. And another very important point with PFI is its linkages with JMB, which is Jamaatul Mujahideen Bangladesh, ISIS, and two of its important members, Abdul Rahman and Abdul Sattar, were ex-SIMI members. So this is the case of PFI. And lastly, I would just like to mention a bit about HUT, Hizbut Tahrir. As we all know that this organization was recently banned by the Indian government in October 2024, as because after discovery of its sleeper cells in the Indian states of Madhya Pradesh, Telangana, Tamil Nadu, and Andhra Pradesh. Now, these sleeper cells were inciting secessionist tendencies, and they were trying to get military assistance from Pakistan. Now, HUT is also very important because basically it is an international terror organization with membership of about 30 plus countries all over the world, and it has its headquarters in Lebanon. And with the current ongoing situation of radical mayhem in Bangladesh, we can also say that HUT is a threat towards India because it has a strong presence not only in Pakistan but also in Bangladesh. And with the current regime and its so-called, you can say, policy of favoring the radical elements of the society, many HUT cadres have now trying to play sort of an active role within the political domain of Bangladesh, and definitely it will have some sort of a security challenge for India. And it is also banned not only in India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, but also in other countries, European countries, especially in UK and Germany, and also in the 5 Central Asian countries, along with countries of Egypt, China, and Indonesia. Now, why I am stressing towards HUT is another very important feature of HUT is its Western educated cadre. Generally, when we talk about Islamic terrorism or we talk about radical terrorism, our concentration goes towards the so-called madrasa products or so-called radicalized element. But with HUT, one of the deciding factors is that it has a presence within the Western educated cadres, and few of its operatives and cadres are highly trained in terms of some of them are engineers or biotech professionals or doctors or architects. So it has the outreach of this organization is far greater than what we perceive in normal case how a terror organization will operate. And secondly, why it is dangerous, because I would say that it seeks to establish a community of like-minded HUT cadres in its host country. Secondly, it radicalizes the vulnerable youth, taking advantage of international crises like what is going on right now in Gaza. Secondly, it tries to build a public opinion, which in most of the cases goes against the democratic government of that country. Because according to HUT, democracy is considered to be a kufr system, that is the system of the unbeliever. So their single point agenda is to demolish the system of the kufr and establish their own Islamic caliphate through the process of jihad. And as I started my presentation, I would like to end it by saying that these three terror organizations still have the capacity to radicalize impressionable youth within the society of India, and at the same time they also pose a threat because they can orchestrate future lone wolf terror attack across the country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Bhattacharya. Again, some excellent points raised, and some that also echoed the Brigadier's points. So we do see sort of intermingling of a lot of strategies, at least, and ideologies, of course. While, of course, a lot of these groups operate in different theaters and different political realities, especially on a local level. May I very quickly now invite Dr. Tricia Bacon for her comments.
Thank you so much for moderating this panel. It's wonderful to be here. Very interesting remarks already so far, and such a distinguished panel. I thought that what might be useful from my perspective here very early in Washington is to give the sort of the main US view on counterterrorism as we enter into 2025 and, of course, a new administration. The counterterrorism concerns for the US are pretty diverse and multifaceted ideologically and organizationally at this time. But there are four main components to the threats that are a focus to the United States. First is, of course, the violent Sunni extremists. Second is the so-called axis of resistance. Third is the racially and ethnically motivated violent extremism. And fourth is the far left. Starting with the violent Sunni extremists, this movement, of course, is still largely comprised of the two poles of the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda. Both are seeking to revitalize their core organizations and position themselves as the leader of the overall movement. But both organizations are far from their peak. They have demonstrated resilience, arguably almost primarily through their affiliates. Both currently have a major leadership deficit, with the Islamic State's leader being largely an unknown, and Al-Qaeda still not having publicly announced its leader. The Islamic State in particular has redoubled its effort to instigate and inspire attacks in the West, with, of course, some success in the recent attack in New Orleans. It's continuing to position itself as a fully rejectionist organization. This includes in the conflicts in the Middle East and the upheaval that we've seen in the region. The wars in Lebanon and Gaza haven't softened the Islamic State's violent opposition to Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas, of course, at the same time, Israel, the United States, and the West writ large. However, it has not been able to really capitalize on this position to date. It is, of course, going to be looking for opportunities to resurge in Syria, but it has also relied on its affiliate, most notably the Islamic State in Khorasan, to be the tip of its spear in terms of conducting and plotting transnational plots, as well as to some degree inspiring them. And it's evident that the Islamic State is still capable of inspiring attacks, as evidenced by the attack in New Orleans, which we have not yet seen any actual direct contacts between the perpetrator and the Islamic State. I expect that we'll see contagion from that attack. It's a very hard attack to disrupt, and it's a very hard attack to detect because it's such a low-tech approach, but yet still very lethal. Meanwhile, Al-Qaeda has played a pivotal role in moving the center of gravity of the Sunni extremist movement to Africa, where violence continues to increase and spread at alarming rates. 2025 is poised to be another record-breaking year in terms of the number of attacks, the amount of lethal violence, the number of countries affected in Africa. But in contrast to the Islamic State, Al-Qaeda has taken a pragmatic, stance towards the axis of resistance, positioning itself as sympathetic and supportive of Hamas despite their past tensions. And we've even seen concerning indications about cooperation between al-Qaeda affiliates and axis of resistance elements, most specifically with al-Shabaab and the Houthis collaboration, which will almost certainly increase the threat in the Red Sea this year. Interestingly, of course, al-Qaeda's de facto leader has had a long-time presence in Iran, and the Afghan Taliban has had a supportive stance towards Iran and Hamas, which all might create more opportunities for mutually beneficial cooperation. Beyond the Islamic State and al-Qaeda, though, Sunni extremists have really accomplished some strategic victories in recent years. They're now the governments in Syria and Afghanistan, and these were not only once unimaginable realizations of a jihadist project, these governments have actually gotten a fair amount of international engagement. They have not been international pariahs in the way one might expect, even if they haven't been formally recognized. And I think there is a very real possibility of another jihadist takeover in Africa in 2025. Moving to the second phase, the second part of the terrorist threat, the so-called axis of resistance, of course, it is facing unprecedented setbacks with the losses for Hamas and Hezbollah, especially at the leadership levels, not to mention the damage inflicted on Iran by Israel strikes and the collapse of the Assad regime. The main threat that's still standing in terms of the axis of resistance comes from the Houthis, who have been the most disruptive and currently are the most capable part of the axis of resistance. They are still pretty well positioned to continue to disrupt economic activity in the Red Sea and may even be able to escalate their activities. Iran-sponsored Shia militias in Iraq have quieted in recent months and are not necessarily fully engaged, although that could change with the circumstances of this year. There is a potential terrorist threat lurking behind the axis of resistance that hasn't really been unleashed and hasn't really been commented on that much either. And that is the transnational capability of Hezbollah primarily, and to some degree Hamas and even Iran. Iran in particular is entering a dangerous year as the Trump administration has tended to prioritize Iran, and Iran has sought to retaliate against Trump officials for the decision to kill Soleimani during the last Trump administration. But for its part, Hezbollah also is well known to have a presence in Latin America, Europe, the United States, Africa, that could be turned into a transnational attack capability should the situation become more difficult in 2025. It is not clear what might unleash that capability for Hezbollah, Hamas, or Iran, but it is a capability that exists. So that is to say that the axis of resistance has the capability to be a greater threat, not the intent to do so. Whereas the Sunni jihadist movement has the intent to be a greater threat, but not yet the capability to do so. Within the United States, the third part of the terrorist threat, the racially and ethnically motivated extremism, has been the most active in recent years, particularly the white supremacist part of this movement. And of course, the elections in the United States last year were gasoline on the fire for this, and Russia has played a key role in amplifying and stoking this division within the United States. But the REMV movement is not as organized or as clearly led as the Sunni jihadist movement or the axis of resistance. So it is a difficult threat to track. It's a difficult threat to anticipate. And though it's often referred to as domestic terrorism within the United States, REMV, in fact, is a transnational ideological movement, with REMV factions in the United States playing a key role in shaping the ideology and the message internationally. The REMV threat is posed to evolve in 2025. It will be emboldened by President Trump's election. And to date, its capacity for violence has been mitigated by federal law enforcement, and there's few identifiable organizations. So it's more of a leaderless resistance type of movement than the bipolar Sunni jihadist movement or the Iran-led axis of resistance. And then I'd just like to conclude with the fourth part of the terrorist threat within the United States, and that is the far left movement. In the United States, the far left has not tended to be a lethal threat. Most of its attacks are more along the lines of property destruction. It's been more lethal in Europe than in the United States. But the far left in the United States is increasingly activated. It became activated by the war in Gaza. Many of you saw the protests on college campuses last year, which moved from just being opposition to the war to explicit support for Hamas and included a number of property destructions and threats. Those protests really were muted during this last school year, as I can attest being on a college campus. But there is more potential for violence in the United States. We've had this historic precedence in the past of when you have these protest movements that fail to influence policy, you may see a violent offshoot. But more to the point, the far left will be animated by President Trump's return to office. And like the REM-V threat, the far left is very decentralized and loosely organized in the United States, probably even more so than the REM-V movement. So we have these four extremist movements of concern to the United States, but they don't operate in isolation from one another. They learn from each other, they imitate each other, even when they don't have direct interaction. The REM-V extremists in the United States have publicly said that they have learned, for example, from Sunni extremist movements. And so there is also the additional dimension of the Hamas October 7th attack. When you have such a highly successful attack, it creates opportunities for other organizations to learn and even potentially find areas for cooperation. At the same time, the United States foreign policy and national security apparatus has firmly shifted its focus to strategic competition. In the case of the Trump administration in particular, counterterrorism and strategic competition are not fully distinct because Iran is part of what is being called the alignment of adversaries, as well as an important state sponsor of terrorism. So that will likely be a priority for the Trump administration. But overall, counterterrorism has really receded from US national security priorities and has become much more political and partisan. At the same time, internationally, strategic competition has damaged international cooperation. The post 9/11 era, where security services could cooperate even when bilateral relationships were difficult, is basically over. And in its place, there are conspiracies, as evidenced by Iran and Russia's failure to act on US warnings and blaming the United States for Islamic State attacks. And unfortunately, even when there is a shared threat, cooperation across strategic competition blocks has grown quite difficult, which I don't see as likely to change in the 2025 and with the Trump administration coming into office. So with that, I'd like to turn it back over to you, Kabir, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Bacon. That was a really well-rounded view of how the U.S. is, what kind of threats that U.S. is reading into right now, and a general view of also how U.S. is viewing counterterrorism from not just from a domestic perspective, but from a global perspective. And I'll come back to you with some questions at a later stage, and I'm sure the audience will as well. Very quickly, I'll move to Priyadarshini now for her comments.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for having me here today at ORF. It's definitely a pleasure being here. So today I'll be focusing and speaking largely on Islamic State Khorasan Province. So Islamic State Khorasan Province, ISKP, is a regional affiliate in South Asia of the Islamic State. It was first formed in 2015 and the first emir of Islamic State Khorasan Province was Hafiz Said Khan. So today, when we look at the recent activities of the ISKP, we see that their operations are going much beyond their core areas being the Khorasan region, including in which Afghanistan and Pakistan is a part of. So if we look at the example of what happened last year, the concert hall attacks in Russia, we understand that ISKP is now indicating objectives that go beyond its local mandate, and in its objective of transcending the local as well as the international in terms of operational capacity, we see that the group is also exploiting the potential of new media for the purpose of recruitment and propaganda. So basically, the use of new media is a part of Islamic State's second phase, that is the networking online phase. Now, when we look at the trends and patterns of ISKP or IS after 2020 onwards, we see that there is a shift in its strategy. So the shift being from controlling territory to now conducting networking online urban warfare. In this phase of controlling territory, the primary focus is on what they call the Tamkeen strategy, meaning where the organization is focused on consolidating territories and implementing and governing by establishing their own versions of the Sharia system. And to achieve this objective, ISKP has successfully asserted its authority in the eastern, northeastern, and northern regions of Afghanistan. Soon after their initial successes in 2015 and 16, the group started witnessing its loss of territory. This was mostly due to the sustained campaigns by the Afghan security forces and the Taliban. Well, in order to stay relevant and to stay alive, the group retreated to their virtual sphere to network online. Um, and again, from 2020 onwards, we see that they have revised their strategic direction, because their operation strategy is more centered towards lone wolf attacks via online recruitment and propaganda. And these attacks today are carried out under the operational strategy of urban warfare, under the leadership of their current emir, Sanaullah Ghaffari, who is popularly known as Shahab al Mujahir. So, according to pro ISKP sources, Mujahir is regarded as an expert in urban warfare tactics. So this tactical shift also includes direct killings of various groups in Afghanistan through urban bombing, and they are not just limited to the Pashtun Talibs, but also other factions such as the Hazaras and the Shia Muslims. Through these urban killings of various sections of the Afghan society, what the ISKP wants is basically to bust the ability of the Taliban to provide security and governance, basically to undermine the legitimacy of the Afghan Taliban within Afghanistan. So basically, if they are able to generate enough civilian unrest by creating a long-term urban bombing havoc, it is for sure that people's trust in their government is definitely going to erode. And this is exactly what the ISKP in Afghanistan wants and is hoping for, so that an alienation of the Afghans from the Taliban uh, would mean a new way will open up for the ISKP's original goal to take place, that is controlling territory in order to establish a caliphate. Well, on the other hand, now in Pakistan, um, until the end of 2023, ISKP has claimed at least responsibility for at least 17 attacks. One such example is the suicide bombing at a political rally in Bajor, KPK, in July 2023. Uh, and this resulted in the deaths of more than 40 civilians. And via its tactics of urban bombing campaigns, they have been able to increase their footholds in the Afghanistan Pakistan border, along with areas such as Balochistan and Quetta. Um, at the heart of this strategy is the use of new media, again for recruitment and propaganda. One such example is ISKP's propaganda machine targeting the disgruntled members of TTP who are unhappy with the Afghan Taliban's actions in diplomacy with Pakistan and China. Pakistan is increasingly becoming a target of ISKP's propaganda, as they are and the ISKP is accusing the Pakistanis for supporting the apostate Afghan Taliban, and also depicting its officials as disloyals to the global caliphate. Recruitment of ex-TTP members has given ISKP an additional advantage of carrying out attacks with minimal challenges and expanding their network further. So today, ISKP's virtual reach has expanded to such an extent that it has managed to come in contact with an 18-year-old Chechen man who was instructed by the ISKP to plot an attack at the Paris Olympics last year. But obviously, this attack did not happen. It failed. This plot failed. Whereas on the other hand, like I mentioned, the Moscow attacks last year, this resulted to the death of nearly 145 individuals, leaving 551 injured, wounded. So when you analyze these two plots, these two incidents, we understand that these two plots highlight the gradual expansion of ISKP's gradual scope from regionalism to internationalism. And this definitely has a serious consequences for regional security in South Asia, particularly beyond Afghanistan and Pakistan. Now, coming to the new media part of ISKP or the Islamic State. So, the digital blitzkrieg of ISKP appears to be linked very well to its original motherboard, that is the Islamic State. And all of these publications are in sync with its Islamic State publications. Well, to name a few official media outlets would be Dabiq, Al Furqan, Al Haya, and so on. And each of these media outlets, they have their own functionings. They have their own content that they focus on. For example, Al Haya Media Center generates media targeting non-Arabic speakers. And their target audience are usually the younger lot, and the kind of propaganda they come up with is more to do with long 1 minute tweets on Twitter, and to an hour long Hollywood style documentaries with special effects and action scenes. Whereas ISKP's most important digital magazine would be the Voice of Khorasan. Um, so of late, Voice of Khorasan started engaging with larger audiences and diaspora communities beyond its core geographical scope. For example, in September last year, again, ISKP's affiliated Al-Azam media outlet released a 47-page long booklet in Persian. In which they are seeking to expand its operations beyond the Khorasan region while promoting lone wolf terrorism. This booklet highlights Muslims seeking citizenships in non-Muslim countries, and they're being labeled as, and all of these citizens of these countries are labeled as infidels who should be fought against. A shift in Islamic State's tactics from controlling territory to now conducting urban warfare through networking online has not in any way diluted the ISKP's ultimate agenda of establishing a worldwide Islamic caliphate. The narrative and idea of establishing a caliphate is very well planted and propagated in every tentacle, every affiliate of the Islamic State right from the beginning, and this dream of theirs still continues. Um, Now, if we were to look into the steps that the international community might take to mitigate the threat of resurgent terrorism, I mean, there are quite a few issues or complexes that the international community faces while addressing the strategic and tactical competition between the Taliban and ISKP. Um, to mitigate the risks of terrorism emanating especially from Afghanistan and Pakistan, uh, broader broader area, South Asian nations must collaborate proactively with global partners. Yeah, global partners, just like Brigadier Tanwar mentioned. Um, Effective measures could also include strengthening broader security, fostering international partnerships, and enhancing intelligence sharing mechanisms. Today, the ISKP may seem a little weaker as a group, but one thing that is for sure is that Islamic State is definitely becoming much more complex, more diverse, and more centralized in nature than it was in the past. Um, this creates security challenges of its own, as instead of one head of Islamic State now has 10 different heads in 10 different countries. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Priyadarshini, for a very comprehensive view at ISKP specifically, considering how close it is to our borders. Before I open it up for questions and comments and so on and so forth, let me take the advantage of being the moderator and ask Brigadier Tanwar two specific questions. I know you have limitations to what you can share. I'm cognizant of that, but I just wanted to probe a little bit on your broader views, specifically from what Indian experience has been. You mentioned drones specifically as being a nuisance, which has come up. Not new; it's been there for a while now. But what kind of experience has India had? I think that, if you talk to people who have, let's say, worked in Syria or in Iraq, where a lot of these crude drones basically found their feet, their experiences were much different because they were dealing with much cruder technologies in 2014, 2015, compared to some of the larger quadcopters that we are seeing being used by not just terrorists but also drug traffickers and peddlers. So there seems to have been an expansion. What has been the Indian experience of that? And I also wanted to probe a little bit contentiously. Was India's experience of dealing with drones slightly delayed because they came to the theater much later, or were we actually a bit ahead of the curve and prepping for that? And very quickly, second question that I had, since everyone's mentioned social media narrative at some level, I'm very curious to know. I always feel that the idea of, let's say, social media or online based radicalization works much better in geographies or countries or states that are not already embroiled in such ideological contestations, right? Such as Iraq or Syria. We don't see recruitments happening there using social media, but we do see recruitments happening for lone wolf attacks successfully in the US. We saw the New Orleans thing, which is a guy from the military, basically. So what has the impact of social media been that adverse in a geography and in a situation like Kashmir, where there is a deep history of ideological intricacies and technology came in much later? So just these 2 points before we open up for more questions.
As far as drones are concerned, so we have seen the usage of drones primarily in two domains. First is the kinetic domain, and second is the non-kinetic domain. Our experience has been that it is much more difficult to employ drones in a kind of a physical attack mode in our context. We haven't seen many experiences of that. There was one incident which I mentioned in Jammu. But beyond that, we haven't had, we have had certain indications of planning, but not of execution, primarily because I think the hold of security apparatus in JNK is much more firmer and much more stricter. As far as and probably also because since it started in 2014-15 in areas which are far away from us geographically, we had a kind of premonition that how it can be used. But our major concern is the use of drones in non-kinetic domain, and that is primarily in supplies of warlike stores from Pakistan, both across the line of control and across the international boundary. And here the linkages with the organized crimes, the narco rings, and the smuggling syndicates come into being. And as the infiltration has become increasingly difficult, therefore, it has become incumbent on the terror handlers who are based in Pakistan to find out innovative means of keeping the supply lines open. And drone is one area where they have in the past managed to supply some kind of quantity. But over, I would say, last 1.5 to 2 years, our anti-drone mechanisms have actually improved quite a bit. And therefore, while it remains a threat, I think we are coming around a situation wherein we can identify the likely tracks, flight tracks, likely dropping zones, and the likely recipients of such consignments. So therefore, the threat remains, but we visualize more in the kind of a supply chain. And also, if you look at the usage, most of it has been of Chinese origin. The DJI Mavics, which have been used extensively, and the assessment as of now probably is that the terrorist organizations are now increasingly trying to cope up with this stricter anti-drone mechanism that we have. The second issue of the social media campaigns and narrative is that how do we see the impact, especially in JNK? Uh, so while I did almost everybody mentioned that online radicalization is an area of concern, but as far as the terror organizations are concerned, uh, the peculiarity of JNK is that the most of the recruitment and the instructions are being coordinated by the terrorist commanders who are based in Pakistan occupied Kashmir or in other parts of Pakistan, and therefore there is very little physical proximity or contact between the recruiters and potential recruits. And therefore, they constantly look at social media to identify individuals who they feel are liable to be recruited. And that is how social media takes importance as far as JNK is concerned. And again, while recruitment is the final process, the entire stage of radicalization and indoctrination does happen because of the kind of narratives and the ideological divide that we see on a day-to-day basis, especially on social media. So that is as far as the impact is concerned.
Thank you so much. I have many more questions for all the panelists, but I won't dive into this just by myself. I'll just open it up. Please ask your questions in a very short format, no monologues, so that we can get as many people involved as possible. And can I start with Sir here? Then I'll go around the table. Sir, just quickly introduce yourself and use the mic, please.
My question is directed to Brigadier. You have mentioned, and probably you might have practical experience of handling CT in JNK. As you may be knowing, that there are three organizations which are basically, in fact, the key players in the JNK scenario. You have not mentioned it, and most of them, in fact, they change their name periodically to evade the actions, international actions or sanctions. So you have not mentioned that. Can you just elaborate on that? The second point is that you mentioned the state of Khorasan, that organization, but the challenge which Pakistan is facing right now is the TTP. TTP is a major challenge. Then the Khorasan state of, in fact, this thing. So can you, madam, elaborate on that? That will be, in fact, in light trend of things, because these are the practical things which are happening right now, being played out on daily basis.
Thank you so much. We'll take one or two questions, and we'll take just a very quick round, and then Sushant sir, you had one. Then I'll come around the table. There's some at the back. I can see you. I'll get to you.
Thanks. I had a question for Dr. Bacon on Hezbollah and its transnational capabilities. How much of those capabilities have been impacted, whether in Latin America and other places, because of the kind of degrading of Hezbollah in its core area of Middle East? Courtesy what the Israelis have done and the fact that they've lost a lot of ground, whether it's in Syria or in other places. Has that impacted their capabilities in other theaters where they are present and they have their networks? That is to Dr. Bacon. to Dr. Bhattacharya, it was, you say that we haven't seen any major attacks for some time now in India. Is this something that we are doing right, or is this something that the terrorists are not able to do correctly? And to Brigadier Tamar, you know, we've always had this problem. We've always played catch up on technology. In the 90s, I remember we used to use Second World War communication sets when the terrorists were using those latest Kenwood sets, and so on and so forth. I could go on and on. At every stage, we've played catch up. Even on the drones thing, we seem to have caught on after about 3, 4 years. Uh, and I'll take your word for it that we've got our act together now. What are the new technologies which are coming in or which could be coming in, which you in the security services are looking at and which you think can pose a danger? And can we not play catch up next time around?
Okay, one more question. Let me take it from the ladies. There's a lot of time. I'll come back to everyone. Yeah, you just use the mic, please, and direct your question to whoever.
Hello, everyone. My question is actually open for anyone who wants to answer. How do you actually measure the success of a counter-terrorism policy? Is it just about reduction in numbers of casualties or explosions? Because if that's the case, we have another spectrum of terrorism that basically talks about counter-terrorism, cyber terrorism, and since you spoke about impact of technologies. So yeah,
Okay,
that's
thank you so
my
much. Dr. Bacon, can I just start with you since you've been patiently waiting on the question that Sushant raised on Hezbollah's external actions and so on?
Yes, absolutely. So I don't think that the losses in Lebanon and Syria have significantly diminished Hezbollah's broader transnational network, because it wasn't really accompanied by major counterterrorism efforts in the various regions where Hezbollah operates. I think that there's two components to its transnational presence. One is it's mostly to date been more of a support, often through illicit crime kinds of activities in those places in Europe, the United States, Latin America, Africa. So it's not necessarily automatically operational capability, but it's a capability that could be leveraged for transnational operations. But the losses in Lebanon and Syria have resulted probably in a diminished command and control for the time being of the transnational network. So it doesn't appear that Hezbollah has made that calculus to make their transnational nodes operational. But I do think it increases the risk that some nodes who have less command and control will see opportunities that they will take themselves. So I think that we're watching for changes in Hezbollah's calculus, as well as the potential for operatives who are operating transnationally to take initiative and perhaps go rogue, as we've seen some plots in other places, for example, Hamas plots in Europe that have some indications that might be happening on that score. So I don't think its capability has been diminished. So I think the lack of transnational attacks is at this point an organizational decision.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Bacon. Dr. Bhattacharya, you can take Sushant's question and maybe also the lady's question about how do you, no? You'll take, okay, fine.
Definitely, we are doing right because, from the perspective of Indian Mujahideen, we can say that most of the leaders of Indian Mujahideen are put behind bars, especially the India operational chief Yasin Bhatkal, who was arrested like in 2013 along with his aide. And other important leaders like you can say Asadullah Akhtar or Subhan Qureshi, Aris Khan, Haider Ali, all these people are behind the bars. But at the same time, we must be very much aware that two of the founding members of Indian Mujahideen, Riaz Bhatkal and Iqbal Bhatkal, are reportedly hiding somewhere in Karachi. So this is also one of the major points with regard to Indian Mujahideen. And secondly, I would say it is right in a way that there has not been a major major terror attacks, but the MO has changed in form of, if we discuss PFI, because PFI has conducted a series of lone wolf terror attacks, not terror attacks, lone wolf attacks in southern India, especially with the murder of RSS leader Srinivasan in Kerala, murder of Pattali Makkal Kachi leader Ramlingam, and also murder of BJP Yuva Morcha leader Praveen Nataru. So in a way, terrorism is still lurking very much in the country, but the the way in which the terror operatives used to be visible, it is changing. The visibility or the pattern of their activities are definitely changing, but yes, it is very much there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I'll just quickly go to Priyadarshini for the question on the ISKP, and perhaps also maybe look into what kind of Venn diagram are we seeing there between the Afghan Taliban, the ISKP, and the TTP.
Right. Okay, so if I have to talk between the relationship between the ISKP and TTP, would if I have to begin with that, so that would mean so both. Yes, hello. Yeah. So yes, so both these terrorist organizations are basically focused in the same areas currently right now in the Afghanistan-Pakistan border region. So both TTP and so the areas of focus are the same, and there is a competition between the two. So yes, I'm getting to you there. So, but the Taliban isn't putting a pressure on the TTP to stop its actions in Pakistan currently right now, is because if they do so, there will be a defect of the TTP members going back to ISKP, which they did back in 2014. So that is one, and the other being in the relationship between ISKP and the Afghan Taliban would mean is basically there's a so difference in narrative, difference in ideology, whereas ISKP is more has a very holistic global approach of holding a worldwide caliphate, whereas the Afghan Taliban's focus is more to do with their power limiting to the Afghanistan, limited to Afghanistan. So that is one thing.
Okay, very quickly, Sushant wants to say. Well, okay, is it linked to this?
Yeah.
Sir, yours linked to this?
Linked to this.
Yeah, okay, both of them very quickly then. Sir, I'll come to you after.
So,
yeah, we'll do that. We'll do that.
so tell me something.
Yeah.
I'm very curious to know this, because we hear this all the time, that Taliban are not acting against TTP because they're afraid TTP will go and join hands with ISKP. Is this an excuse, or is this for real? Because we haven't as yet. There have been some people who've been involved with TTP who've gone and joined hands in, or who have formed ISKP rather. But we haven't seen any indication that there is this threat outstanding. Maybe the Taliban are just using the TTP because TTP is Taliban. It's nobody else but Taliban. So maybe we need to relook at this whole equation between TTP and Taliban.
Fair. Okay, sir, you very quickly. Yeah.
You mentioned strategic competition. You know, we are suddenly gone from the war on terror, which started after 9/11, which ended, according to me, when Taliban was put back in seat in Kabul. And now you have these non-state actors acting as proxies, and you have what we saw. We are getting these violent extremists who have bounties on their head on CNN, and they have image makeovers, and their beards get shortened, and they have an image like a Che Guevara, or wearing suits coming to Qatar and Syria and all. So the lady talked about kufr. Kufr is already on.
All right. So, sir, can I just go to you to answer some of the previous questions? Dr. Bacon, I'll come back to you later on. And then we'll take the next round. We have a lot of time, don't worry.
So I'll just ask these questions one by one. Firstly, about the terrorist organizations in J&K. Obviously, I did not mention them by name, because while I did mention Lashkar, Jaish and Hizbul Mujahideen, the recent emergence of proxy organizations like the TRF or the People Anti-Fascist Front, the PAF, or the JKGF, JNK Ghaznavi Force, So we see them as the proxy organizations, and as you mentioned, that it is just the change of nomenclature. The core leadership, the core philosophy, and the core organizational structure remains the same. So we have TRF, which is an offshoot of Lashkar. We have PAF, which is an offshoot of Jaish. So that is why we are dealing with them as we are dealing with Lashkar or Jaish. That is point one. Second is, if you look at just the numbers, today in JNK specifically, since you mentioned JNK, the numbers are at an all-time low in terms of the cadre strength. We have not more than 120, 130 terrorists, out of which only less than 15 are locals. So today the numbers are 150, so we'll say 150. If it is at 600, we'll say 600. In 2000, there were 3,000, we were saying 3,000. Before that, there were 10,000, we were saying 10,000. So it's just a reflection of the situation on ground. And everybody is entitled to their assessment of ground situation. But the point I'm trying to make is that these terrorist organizations are identified, and it is not appropriate, or it is not probably worthy to give them this kind of a credence by talking about them specifically. That is why I did not mention them individually. As far as the metrics of a successful counterterrorism campaign is concerned, the point you asked. So obviously the violence levels or the number of kills or number of incidents is not the only metrics, but it is an important metric. There are other parameters on which you can base your counterterrorism campaign on. Do the terrorist organizations control any territory? If they do, then obviously the threat is graver. In India, do they do? No. Are they able to disrupt common civil life with impunity? Are the administrative structures functioning the way they should? What is the kind of strength that and influence the terrorist organizations have? So these are the other parameters that we obviously will base our counterterrorism campaign upon. And then there are other domains of cognitive domain. What is the psychology of the people? What is the perceived alienation or not? But if you were to say that I am running a counterterrorism campaign, obviously your first parameter would be how much you have degraded the capability of any terror outfit to cause physical violence. So that is not an only parameter, that is an important parameter. But obviously when any government organization or any state, it assesses its effectiveness of counter-terror campaign, it does not only look at one, it looks at various other parameters as well. As far as the question on playing catch-up is concerned, yeah, I do agree that the terrorists have this tendency of adapting themselves to new methods, new technologies, because finally they have to survive. So when they started using mobile, we started intercepting them. Then this is down to something called a YSMS, which was a combination of a Bluetooth and a mobile. Then they have gone to something more sophisticated now, which has a greater amount of encryption built into this. And as we decode the modus operandi that they are adopting, they switch on to the next one, primarily because their survival is at stake. Can we stay ahead of the curve? Yeah, we can. We can and we should. But technology is not only about neutralizing the terrorist. For example, if you look at the use of technology by terrorist organizations, it can be for communication, for command and control, and for execution. So if you look at an Indian context, our main focus is on communication, both within the area where they are operating and, more importantly, from where they are to Pakistan. And that is probably where we are now trying to decipher the new ways and means, because whatever we decode, it leads to a significant amount of degradation, and that is why they are forced to change. So for example, today uh, with confidence, I can say that use of any kind of communication equipment by any terrorist organization is something that they are guarding against. They do guard against, and they have some means which we are privy to, and we the probably the disadvantage that we have is that we have to react to what new method they will adopt. But apart from communication, we are using technology independently for our own operation. So that is the another aspect, which is de-linked from what terrorist organizations are using. So two aspects. In one, we are playing catch up because it is they who have to survive. In the other aspect, in which our operations are independent, so we are using a lot of new tools, both for surveillance and for execution. So that would be my take on that.
So you talked about strategic competition. Is not the use of proxies, which has become, we blame Pakistan as a state sponsor of using proxies of terrorism. Iran is doing it, everyone is doing it, and now we are, we started they are transforming into non-state actors. We saw Taliban, we saw Syria now. Okay, so isn't that going to create a bigger problem, because you are now? So what I'm trying to say in short is as the war on terror is over and we are dealing with these non-state actors, and we are putting them in power, and we are giving them de facto recognition. Okay, is that not determining outcomes? Then the war on terror. This conference is about talking against terrorism. Violent extremists are getting image makeovers and they're put on CNN with their beard shortened suddenly. And they said, and they're being asked, and they're saying, I'm a transformed man and I have a new vision now. Okay? Right? Yeah, then they go to an Italian.
Dr. Bacon, can you quickly address that?
I mean, I think that proxy warfare in general is going to become more common with the rise of strategic competition. I take your point about some jihadists getting a makeover and becoming more acceptable, something that's hard to imagine, right, 20 years ago. The Taliban has a fair amount, including from India, of international engagement. So there has been an appetite to engage with these governments that during the war on terrorism was hard to imagine. But I think now that strategic competition has become the priority, some of this has become more palatable to states in the international system, as has the use of non-state proxies. I think that this is something that we are likely to continue to see occur, as there are a number of stable and unstable states where some of these organizations are operating and very much have the potential to take power.
Thank you so much. Are there any more questions at the back? So there's one there. Well, there are lots of them there. I'll go at the back right now because they haven't had a chance. So we'll start with you. I'll come that side after you.
Good evening, everyone. I'll put up 4 points here pertaining to the technology vertical. We have discussed in general what has happened in past. We have general discussion of what are the terrorist groups working, etc., etc., etc. But what I'll be giving 4 points. First is alignment faking. Second is persuasive AI. Third is CRQC. And fourth is wire heading. And I'm sure none of these terms would associate with anybody here, because these are all technology terms which are upcoming. Now, these technology terms will not solve today's problem, but these technology terms, I'll request you, I'll repeat again after I sit down, you just explore what exactly are these terms. Alignment faking, CRQC, cryptographically relevant quantum computers, persuasive AI, and wire heading. Now, these technologies, in case we are start working upon today, we'll be able to get an idea of what lies ahead of us, 2030, 2035, what will be there, what kind of terrorism will be there. Otherwise, we'll be again in a reactive mode. To be proactive, we have to be aware of what exactly are the technologies which are lying today ahead of us, around us, but which are subtle, of which we are exactly the victims today. We may not be aware that we are the victims today of a lot of things. AI is affecting into each one of us, whether we call it agent AI or whether we call it individual AI. AI is affecting each one of us.
Right.
Similarly, quantum is coming up. So that.
Thank you so much, sir. Okay, I'll take one question from the lady there who's been trying for a while.
Hi, I'm Anushka Saraswat, and I'm a lawyer, and I work in the prosecution side of white collar crime. So my question is basically for Brigadier, and I wanted to ask about the role of money laundering in the combating of financing of terrorism, because in my experience so far, I felt like that there needs to be done some research on what is the corporate's role. What is the role of corporates or the shell companies
Right. Okay.
operating in India in the context of money laundering, and how probably the Indo-Nepal border is really,
Right. So money laundering,
yeah,
basically,
money
right? Okay.
laundering.
We'll
Yes.
take one more question, sir. I'll just stay at the back for one more minute. Is there anyone else? Otherwise, right over there. Yeah.
Hello everyone.
Please keep it short. Yeah, we have.
My question is directed to Dr. Bhattacharya, ma'am. While we have seen individual lone wolf attack, as you mentioned, but not that of that frequency as we are witnessing in West or Europe, do we have a particular policy mechanism, or it's just as Sushant sir says, it's just happened by default? Is we have a certain policy that can be replicated in Europe or America? They can learn from us. My first question. And my second question is this: why the number of bomb explosions have been reduced in India, as you mentioned, but what about the cyber crime? Is there is a fine line between cyber crime and cyber terrorism? And if so, since every individual is getting affected by this cyber crime or cyber terrorism, do we have a certain policy mechanism for this? Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Okay. Okay. Very quickly, all three. This is the last. I think we'll take. Very quickly.
Thank you very much. My question is open to all. How do you see, if we all hope that India will soon make up its position to the United Nations Security Council permanent membership, how do you see that when India will assume that position, it will affect or it will aid India in countering terrorism? Thank
Okay.
you.
For considering my question. My question is guided to Brigadier Tama. It is with regards to the return of Kashmiri youth from terrorist grabs. In the past, we have seen the examples of Kuka Pare and Lance Naik Nazir Ahmad Wani, who tried returning from terrorism, but ultimately militants targeted them. So, do we have better measures to take care of this situation now? Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Good evening. I am Colonel Vidur Sharma. I am currently the Research Fellow of the ORF. My question is again to Brigadier Tanwar. I believe you used to be the favorite today, sir, and also to Priyadarshini. Both of you can answer this question. It's basically, you can say, a follow-up or subsequent question what Mr. Sushant Sharina just brought out regarding the ineffectiveness of the terrorist. I just want to know, like we have seen in the past, a lot of terrorist organizations have followed this strategy that whenever their chips are down, they keep quiet and lie dogo, and they do resuscitation and they carry out their own preparations. So I'm just giving a doomsday scenario, you can say, or I may be devil's advocate, I'm saying. So what is the possibility of this STS-like situation, what the STS did in Syria? Nobody was expecting that this is going to happen, and suddenly one fine day this organization comes and they took over. So the similar type situation by either by the ISIS-K or maybe other their front organization or the existing organization do the same thing in J&K. And if not, then why not?
Okay, so what I will very quickly do is, okay, there's one more question at the back, if possible. I'll allow the possibility. Which is the one more? Okay, yeah.
Hi, sir. I'm Fahad from Kashmir, Srinagar. I'm project head of J&K Peace Foundation. We have been working for.
Could you just speak a bit louder, please? Yeah.
I'm from J&K, sir. Srinagar.
Yeah, okay.
I'm working as project head J&K Peace Foundation. We are promoting peace, prosperity, brotherhood, and communal harmony in Kashmir since 1992. Our organization was established by Shri Atal Bihari Vajpayee ji. So I would like to know from the Brigadier, sir, as the organization in Kashmir are working for peace, civil societies. So what's the role of the organizations to encounter the tactics of Pakistan's, which they are playing in Kashmir? So I would like to know what are the guidelines so that we will work for the peace and we will finish the terrorism and the tactics of Pakistan.
Okay. Thank you so much. What I'll do is 2 minutes each to all panelists to address whatever they would like to address in this gamut of questions. I'll start with Brigadier Tanwar, then I'll go to Dr. Bacon, and to Dr. Bhattacharya, and we can finish with Priyadarshini.
So basically, I'll address 4 questions. If I miss out any, I'll come back again.
We have time after
First-
this for
yeah.
during snacks.
So first question is about the terror financing and money laundering. Very quickly, while there are other government agencies that are looking into it, I think over the last few years, both internationally and nationally, there is a greater recognition of the fact that it is important to curb the funding trails and identify them. The challenge is that the conventional jurisdictional frameworks, they do not really align with the modern technological tools of terror financing. For example, while the data is non-territorial, the trails are non-territorial, but the legal framework in most of the cases has to be territorial. So, to my mind, a greater coordination internationally. We have these AMLATs, the mutual legal assistance treaties, and intelligence sharing frameworks within the jurisdiction. We have agencies like FIU India, and we have the role that FATF is playing, which acts as a deterrent. So I think we are coping up with this challenge, and I'll keep it brief. Second question is about this return of Kashmiri youth from the folds of militancy. Kuka Pare did not return. In fact, he came back and fought militancy. So did Nazir Wani, who joined TA. So firstly, what is the youth that we are looking at today? Today, there are approximately 3,000 families in POJK, some of whom want to come back, some of them don't want to come back. We are looking at less than 15 local terrorists today in JNK, which to my mind, if they wanted to come back, they would have come back by now. So probably I don't see that there will be a one-odd surrender. The security forces and this government, I think they have put out very attractive terms for anybody who wants to come back with the guarantee of life and future benefits. How can we make them safer is something that is a security issue as well as a social issue. So some of them face some kind of a social estrangement, which is something that organizations like JNK Peace Foundation can address. But I don't see that there is a physical threat to the individuals who are coming back. If we just look at the data, in last 10 years, we would have had 40 to 50 surrenders and apprehensions, similar number. Very few of them have been eliminated or targeted. So I think that is, we can't look at two individual and say that everybody is under threat. Okay. The third concern is about whether we can have Syria kind of a takeover. Maybe you're also had in mind Hamas-like attack. In JNK and in fact across the country, I don't think that is a possibility. While in this field you should never rule out anything, because the first issue is, which I addressed earlier, is do the terrorist organizations control any territory today in India? The answer is no. All their bases are across. We have a very robust infiltration posture on the line of control and deployment on the IB. So I don't think that the terrorist organizations today, as we speak, are in a position to leave alone do STS kind of action, but even establish a secure base for any finite amount of time in any part of this country. And we are very fairly confident of that, and also the numbers and the equipment profile and the leadership which we have. So I think it is it will be quite a dramatic thing if it really happens, and I don't think it will happen. The last part is about organizations like JKP's foundations, and we have many of them now. Last few years, there appears to be a greater desire in the civil society in Kashmir, in J&K at large, to exploit this relative period of peace and stability. And I think most of the organizations, and I can see two of them, representatives sitting here, most of the organizations actually know what they have to do. And we know that the strategy of Pakistan is to somehow revive this terrorist separatist ecosystem that has been dismantled to a large extent, to increase the levels of violence, and to create conditions which undermine the credibility of the Indian state in J&K and in rest of the country. So these are very clear objectives which Pakistan has demonstrated time and again, and the role of not only the civil organizations but the entire population of J&K and of this country is to create conditions which do not allow that to happen. And that is, by ensuring, if I were to just list out a few opportunities to the youth, conducting events which give an idea of how much peace and stability has come to the state, ensure communal harmony both within and outside the religion, and more importantly, act as a connect between the locals and sometimes their perceived notion that there are outsiders who come there. So I think these are the 4 or 5 pillars that I would uh, outline, and I think most of the organizations are cognizant of this requirement.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Bacon, some concluding thoughts from your end?
And from my standpoint, I think we are entering into a new phase of how we have to deal with terrorism internationally. We're at one in which there's much more competition and there's much less cooperation. And so counterterrorism partnerships that are largely going to follow along the lines of the strategic competition fault lines. At the same time, as a question alluded to earlier, we're seeing the normalization of some jihadist governments. And I think that is going to be challenged further in 2025. But overall, I think the United States will be limited in its engagement in counterterrorism under the Trump administration, as other considerations like immigration, tariffs, and efforts to counter China will really be the most prominent issue for the United States under the new administration.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bhattacharya.
Yeah. Regarding the lone wolf terror attack, I would like to say that the statistics, if we go by, entire section of European Union, they had 14 such attacks. And India, you can say we had like 4 to 5 such attacks in last 7 to 8 years. So I don't think there is a major difference between what is happening in India and what is happening in each of the constituent units of EU. So I don't think there is anything that the Western countries, they need to learn from us or we need to learn from them, because our socio-political setup is very much different. So each country has to deal with its own, challenges, taking its own socio-political and its own cultural factor, which is very important. So I don't think there is any synergy between what is happening in India and what is happening right now in most of the Western countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bhattacharya. Concluding remarks from Priyadarshini, and we can end after this.
So, answering your question, I think Brigadier Tanwar more or less touched upon all the points that he had to say. And yeah, with regard to Islamic State, so I don't think they will be able to do something like that in either Pakistan or India right now, because they will not even dare to go into loggerhead assault with the government or the establishments, and at least in these two countries. So rather, instead of focusing on controlling territory, what they can possibly do, or what they are doing right now currently, is focusing in the digital platform and encouraging more lone wolf attacks to propagate their final agenda, their goal, in a way, So that's it.
All right. If you wanted, we can continue this for many hours. But thank you, everyone, for coming in. Thank you to all my panelists for a very robust discussion. Please join us for some refreshments outside. Some of the conversations can continue there. And thank you, Dr. Bacon, for joining us online. And hope to see everyone here soon. Thank you.